Welcome to the 2025 Karl Barth Conference, the Incarcerated God. My name is Kate. I am the director of the Center for Barth Studies here. Thank you so much for coming to this conference. Hello also to all of you who are attending online. We are so happy to have you here with us. I have been planning this conference for, I guess, 3 years now. We partnered with 3 other schools, Calvin University, Drew University, Duke Divinity School. Those are the 3 schools that have the most, I would say they are the leaders in prison education. And I'm so grateful that many of the leaders in these programs have agreed to speak at this conference. In your packet, you will find a welcome letter at the front. I write much more clearly than I speak. So I'm hoping that you will read this and you will get some understanding of how this conference came to be what it is now, and what Barth thought about not only well, he actually toured prisons here in 1962. He toured 3 different ones, and some of the comments that he made could be made now too. I wanted to say that since I started planning this conference, my goal has been trying to figure out how to center people in the conversation who either are currently incarcerated or were. So you will see many different parts of this conference that have been planned with that goal in mind. All of your meals will be catered by a company called Macro Bites. In your packet, there is a little handout which will tell you something about the company. All of your breakfast, lunch, and breaks will be served by them. They were 3 friends who were incarcerated at the same time, and after they were released, they started this company, and it's just an incredible mission that they have. The president is going to be speaking briefly tomorrow at about 10, and he'll tell you a bit about his story. On Monday afternoon, we will have the chance to be in conversation with 4 students who are currently enrolled in the Calvin Prison Initiative at the Hanlon State Prison in Michigan. A recent graduate of the program, Sean England, will be leading that discussion. Where's Sean? Sean is in the back there. On Tuesday afternoon, we have organized a call with a journalist named Lyle May, who is currently incarcerated and on death row in North Carolina. He'll be calling into the conference to respond to one of our speakers. If you could say a prayer that actually happens. It's been quite the process of trying to get that lined up. So I'm just hoping that all goes well with that. On Tuesday night, I invite you all to attend a play called Count. In your packet, you will see this here. You can purchase a ticket through the QR code here. This is a play at McCarter, which is a short walk from here. There will be a 3:00 show and a 7:00 show. I'd encourage you to attend the night show. There will be a discussion panel after the play. And then there will be a reception afterwards. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this is because it tells the true testimony of 6 men who are currently on death row now in North Carolina. So I do hope you can join us for this. Now for some housekeeping. If you lose your conference packet, you can just scan this handy little QR code, and this will take you to the virtual version of what you received when you checked in. I also want to explain this. So if you put your name here, then you can put your pronouns here, just so we can be respectful of people. And then because we're all kind of trying to figure out COVID, and some of us are sick, and some of us might not be as comfortable in crowds, I was hoping have uh, we could show people what our level of comfort is. So the first one is if you don't want to be touched, if you don't want to have anybody shake your hand, if you just want to be have your 6 feet or something. Well, you're probably not going to get that here because we're all very close. Um, the next one is if you're fine with just maybe like handshakes or high five. And the third one is if you're okay with people actually hugging you, maybe more if you would like that. Um, and then on the back, we are on WhatsApp. So if you have a question, you can send us a text there and we can answer any questions that you might have. Um, it would be super helpful if you could keep this on throughout the conference just so we know what your name is. And so you can keep up with the schedule. All meals will be catered in the Mackay Lounge. You will get your food through the line there, and then you'll eat in the dining hall, which is to the right. You'll see people, you'll be able to get in there. People will help you to know where you need to go. There will also be vendors outside of the lounge where we will eat. I encourage you to stop by, spend a ton of money that you don't have. Um, awesome books that will be there. And then briefly, I just wanted to introduce the staff who have worked so hard with me to make this entire conference happen. If you could stand up, that would be great. Shiori um, is basically the person who's going to be leading the entire virtual component. So thank you so much for all your work on that. Yanin Mello, who has been with me for the last 3 years. He just graduated in May, so I'm very sad that he won't be a student here anymore. Isaac Sharp is the new program manager for all the centers at the school. He's been so helpful. Hank Spalding, are you Hank? He is the editorial manager for the center. Um, and then Gavin Chase, who is the person that you probably met when you checked in. And then our newest member, Izzy, who's in the corner there. He has been so incredibly helpful doing so many different things that have truly made this whole entire thing that you see possible. I also want to send a sincere thanks to our campus partners. The communication department at the school has been incredible in spreading the word about this conference. Finally, I just want to say thank you to all the people um, who have given us funds to make this possible. There have been so many moving parts to this conference, and it couldn't have been possible without the support of Calvin University, Duke Divinity School, Baker Academic, Stock, Equal Justice USA, and the Hispanic, the HTI. They made this conference possible for all people to attend, no matter what their income is. And then I just wanted to pass this over to Sarah Job quickly because she wanted to say a few things before Douglas Campbell comes up and introduces our first speaker.
Don't go anywhere. I do want to say one thing because Kate cannot thank herself. But this conference would not have happened without Kate's vision. 3 years ago, Kate said, "What do you think about doing a whole conference on incarceration under the auspices of the Barth Center?" I said, "Please." So I just want to say thank you to Kate because she can't thank herself. I want to give you this icon of Epaphroditus that Duke Divinity School had commissioned for the 15th anniversary of our prison studies program. Epaphroditus, yes, let's clap for Kate. So this is by Gracie Morbitzer. Epaphroditus is the random biblical character that you don't remember. And you don't remember him because he worked in prisons, and most of us are not really memorable. But Epaphroditus is who the church at Philippi sent to minister to the needs of Paul while he was incarcerated. Epaphroditus gets sick to the point of death because ancient and modern prisons are places where disease spreads rapidly. And so I've come to think about Epaphroditus as the patron saint of those who hang around prisons. And I very much consider Kate to be one of those people who is using her platform and her privilege to raise awareness about prisons in the United States and beyond. So, yes, I think you're in his line.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Thank you. I'm now going to pass the mic over to Dr. Campbell.
Excitement. I'm standing in Karl Barth prison pulpit, introducing the Reverend Dr. Ben Chavis. I think this is actually the highlight of my life. I mean that. Dr. Chavis is the best person to tell his story, which he will do over the next 45 minutes. So I am going to introduce him very briefly. But for those of you that don't know him, he is a bona fide hero. And he's just the sort of hero that we need during the times that we are in. He was born in 1948 in Oxford, North Carolina, just up the road from Durham. Some of you might have read the book by Tim Tyson, Blood Done Sign My Name. If you haven't, you should. Very ugly racial history in that place, but also a story of reconciliation. So this was his context. In 1963, he became the statewide high school student youth coordinator. Statewide. He was 15 years old. He was still in high school. This was something that Martin Luther King asked him to do and that he worked with the King on. 1968, he graduated from UNC Charlotte with a BA with a bachelor's in chemistry. Went back to Oxford, led a protest march that was successful because of discrimination in that place. And 2 years later, he was asked to go and calm down a situation in Wilmington. Now, King had been assassinated by now. It was 1971, but racial tension was very high in Wilmington, and all sorts of racial injustices were being perpetrated during a time of integration. He was centered in a church run by a white pastor where Black civil rights activists, nonviolent activists, were agitating. There was a firebombing in a local grocery store, and the National Guard was sent in, and 10 of the activists, including him as their leader, were arrested, falsely charged. It was a kangaroo trial, and they were sentenced to horrendous periods of time in jail, in prison, for something that they obviously had not done. Benjamin Chavis received a 34-year sentence for his role not firebombing a grocery. This became a cause célèbre. Amnesty International took up this case. Drew international attention. The Soviet Union humiliated the United States when Jimmy Carter was castigating the Soviet Union for their political prisoners. And the leader of the Soviet Union said, well, what about the Wilmington 10? One of whom is sitting with us tonight. About 8 years later, they were paroled. They were not exonerated until 2012. Governor Bev Perdue issued the pardons. However, he made good use of his time in prison because he was enrolled at Duke Divinity School, unbeknownst to most. And the prison van would come from Orange County Jail and drop him off outside the chapel every day. And he didn't end up at the Divinity School. Very tumultuous times, but we found out in the Chronicle that the students really enjoyed him. He was invited to lecture in the Black Church Studies part of the course, and graduated, became a minister in the UCC in 1980, and went on to Union to do a PhD. In 1986, he published a book, Toxic Waste and Race in the USA. This was a landmark volume. Dr. Chavis had realized that the previously separated spheres of environmental activity and racism were deeply connected. And he demonstrated this with a trove of data and basically launched the field of environmental justice, which is with us to this day. He was obviously destined for great things, and so he was the leader of the NAACP in 1993 and 94, and was the national director for the Million Man March in 1995. I'm tempted to say, could we get you to do that again? That would be great. From that position, he founded the African American Leadership Summit and numerous other national initiatives. Closing this out, he is also deeply invested in youth and has a deep knowledge of hip hop, and saw this as a way of integrating disaffected and alienated youth in a very, very far-sighted way. And he's also, for a chemist, strangely creative, I feel. And he published a book, Psalms from Prison. In its first edition, it came out in 1982, based on the spiritual practices and the insights that he learned while he was incarcerated. It's now in its third edition, I believe, and I urge you all to buy it and read from it. Reverend Dr. Chavis, we could not be more grateful that you are here to tell us about your life and give us some words of wisdom for this moment of crisis that we are in. Dr. Chavis.
Good evening. I usually don't write out my lectures, but for this auspicious occasion, I did. Distinguished colleagues, friends, and fellow seekers of freedom, justice, and equality, I extend to each of you heartfelt greetings from the Duke Divinity School in Durham, North Carolina, and from the Black Press of America based in Washington, D.C. Today, and throughout the 2025 Karl Barth Conference, we will have come together not merely to speak about Karl Barth, not merely to ask old, unresolved questions, not merely to assert contemporary answers to the complexity of the Christian church's demand for theological clarity about imprisonment, about incarceration, and to provide not merely to reflect on incarceration just as an ontological mandate. So in other words, this is a complex subject, as Karl Barth would have it. No, we are also urgently gathered at the intersection of God's grace and humanity's chains, God's grace and humanity's prisons, God's grace and humanity's dehumanization of others, the institutionalization of inhumanity for profit, for vengeance, justifiable cruelty, and the ultimate, to take a life and say that's justice. For if we truly believe, and I believe we all should believe, as Barth emphasized, I quote him here, the humanity of man is constituted in the fact that God becomes man, and in that way binds man to himself, unquote. Then we must say and affirm that God becomes incarcerated, God becomes convicted, God becomes sentenced, and God becomes among the condemned, the damned, the imprisoned, and the discarded. In the Old Testament, we're reminded by the prophet Isaiah in the 61st chapter, verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prisons to those who are bound. I wish we were practicing that. In the New Testament, we are again challenged in the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 25th chapter, verses 36 through 40, to follow the example in Jesus Christ, where it is written, quote, I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it also unto me. Yet our faith also affirms that God is the liberator from the prisons and the sins of humanity through Jesus Christ. Karl Barth, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., and other theologians, prisons were more than physical structures of concrete walls, steel bars, and chains. Poverty is a prison. Racial and ethnic oppression and discrimination are prisons. Anti-Semitism is a prison. Hate is a prison. Inhumanity is a prison today in America. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, better known as ICE, sinfully raiding immigrants' homes, churches, and workplaces, all that's a prison. Grab people, snatch people, grab mothers out of their children's hands. The mainstream media focuses on what's going on in El Salvador, but we need to focus on how did they get to El Salvador? What is happening when people are snatched without a warrant? People are snatched because they may have a tattoo, or because they may speak Spanish, or because they may look, all of us could get snatched by ICE. Specifically, Barth's anthropology presupposed his ontology and Christology. Who is God? Who is man? Who is woman? How does our faith in Jesus Christ commend us on the pathway to be liberated from sin? These are the ontological and Christological questions that Barth lays on the altar of the church. If we are obedient, committed to following Jesus, we must overcome the debilitating and confining consequences of sin. Disproportionate mass incarceration is a sin. And if the church is going to challenge this matter, we just can't challenge it as a political or economic or social matter. It is a theological matter. And I'm going to leave my text in on. I'm concerned that the church at large will relatively silent at a time we should be elevating and amplifying our voices on behalf of those who are voiceless. We've got a lot of work to do. Thus, we should see prisons not as sites of divine abandonment, but as places of divine visitation and intervention. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, today there are more than 1.25 million people in prison across the nation. 1.25 million. There are plans to build more state and federal prisons. In addition, there's a green light that has been extended for the privatization of jails and prisons in America, where huge financial profits will be made by the private owners of prisons. In many states, prison inmates are still referred to as property. I remember, full disclosure, because of my involvement in the civil rights movement, I've been arrested 6 or 7 times. Later, always adjudicated, found not guilty, charges dropped. But once I was in federal court in Raleigh, I was found not guilty. Then the judge said, federal judge in Penn says, well, Chavis, you're still the property of North Carolina because you still got these state charges. And I thought about the property. The state owns me. The state owns the incarcerated. Property rights, not human rights. The contradictions are very clear. The church must not be silent. The church must not be blind to the injustice and inhumanity. The church must go into prisons in the ecclesiastical interests of freedom and fairness. God, through Christ Jesus, has a solidarity with the oppressed and the imprisoned. If the people of God are jailed and imprisoned unjustly, then so is God incarcerated with them. Yet, God's redemption and liberation shakes the foundation and grounds of prisons until the chains fall off. Theologians James H. Cone, Gustavo Gutierrez, and Frederick Herzog, all of whom I got a chance to work with, will all agree with Barth's assertion, quote, God's grace is for all, even the godless, the guilty, and the condemned. For whom else would grace be? God's love is for all. The oneness of humanity is the oneness of God. God is the God of the oppressed. God is the God of human liberation and salvation. Barth stated with passion, quote, even in the darkest places, the light of resurrection shines, unquote. Our faith in Jesus Christ is the faith of resurrection. It is the faith of liberation, compassion, and transformation. Lived experiences help to inform others. I'm a first-hand witness of what it means to be unjustly imprisoned in America. But I'm not bitter. Time does not permit me to tell you the entire story of the Wilmington Terror. I'll just give you a little clip. As my brother introduced me, I'm a native of the rural agricultural town of Oxford in eastern North Carolina. My family lives on land that we have owned for over 200 years in Granville County. My great-great-great-great-grandfather was the Reverend John Chavis, the first African-American to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church of America and the first African-American to attend Princeton Theological Seminary in the late 1700s. I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. I come from a family with a long legacy: Christian preachers, public school teachers, college professors, farmers, medical doctors, lawyers, and freedom fighters. They had no choice. I had to fight for freedom. Growing up, I just wanted to make sure that my age did not incapacitate me. So I probably broke the law. I put my age up. I was driving at 14, and I had mobility. And that's how I became the state youth coordinator for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. 3 years after Dr. King's assassination on April 4, 1968, the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice, under the leadership of the Reverend Dr. Charles E. Cobb and the Reverend Dr. Edwin R. Edmonds, dispatched me to Wilmington, North Carolina, to help local grassroots organizations and to confront the racism in the public school system. I'm sharing this true story with you to exemplify the faith calling of the church to demand justice, fairness, and equality amidst a national context of racial and political division. Karl Barth has said, true justice is the justice that restores, not the justice that destroys. I'll say that again. True justice is the justice that restores, not the justice that destroys. Restorative justice. Reparatory justice. And of course, we're living in a time right now where history is being erased. And I would say at this conference, if you allow history to be erased, you allow theology to be erased. What informs our theology? If it's not the historical record of people speaking out, of people standing up, of people coming together. True justice is justice that restores, not the justice that destroys. The presence of God with the oppressed and with those in prison sets the stage for the affirmation of the concept of restorative justice and redemptive love. If you would ask me, what is my definition of racism? I would categorically give you the answer that racism is ignorance. Racial hatred is ignorance. Anti-Semitism is ignorance. Ethnic and racial cleansing are fueled by ignorance. The church is called to overcome ignorance, injustice, and inequality. That's why the United Church of Christ sent me to Wilmington, North Carolina in 1971. We organized local transformative freedom movement in that city inside a Gregory congregation of the United Church of Christ, a Black church with a young white pastor, the Reverend Eugene Templeton. In 1971, keep in mind, President Nixon is still in the White House. And his national discriminatory law and order campaign was made manifest in that port city. Although we were dedicated nonviolent civil rights activists, we were violently targeted and attacked by far right-wing white supremacists from the Ku Klux Klan and a heavily armed paramilitary group named the Rights of White People, the ROWP. 1 year later, in 1972, the state of North Carolina, supported by the Nixon administration, arrested 8 young African-American teenage high school student leaders and Ann Shepard, a local white female community social worker, and me. Reverend Templeton and his wife were driven out of town with threats on their lives. We were charged unjustly for allegedly arson and conspiracy to assault police officers. We were convicted and sentenced to a combined total of 282 years in prison, all 10 of us. I had the longest, the 34-year sentence. The point here is, I did not gain faith after being incarcerated. I took my faith in Jesus Christ with me into the prisons. They could not lock us. They could lock us up in prison, but they could not lock Jesus out. It took almost a decade for the Wilmington team to prove our innocence. By God's grace and love, after a decade of litigation and court appeals, the Wilmington team convictions were overturned by the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Then another 30 years went by for the first female governor of North Carolina, the Honorable Beverly Perdue, to issue a pardon of innocence to the Wilmington team on December 31st, 2012. Again, the point of sharing this lived experience here at the 225 Karl Barth Conference is that there is an ontological convergence with Barth's renderings about the incarceration of humanity. We refused, that is the Wilmington 10, to serve time in prison. Instead, we made time serve the freedom movement. We kept the faith. We stayed active. We never let bitterness or alienation set in. Jesus was with us. We were with Jesus. Now, recently, with the Duke Divinity School, I had an opportunity to go speak to some inmates in the federal prison. And I'm not supposed to tell you the name of the federal prison, so I won't say that. I don't want to violate prison rules. But I can say that it was a great moment. They had bring in extra chairs. The place was packed. And not only were the inmates clapping, the prison guards were clapping. I'm always kind of upfront and frank, because to me, God allows us to have these experiences for a reason. It's how do we communicate? How do we share our lived experiences? The worst thing in the world is to put your life's journey in a closet somewhere, in a file cabinet somewhere. You know, we live in the digital age. You know, you walk around these little things, I don't know what they're called, that you put into a computer. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Is that our life? We should use technology to amplify the word of the Lord. So while I was at the federal prison, I had to think about it. I said, you know what, I'm going to tell this story. When I was at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is when we were sentenced to 282 years in prison. At that time in Central Prison, which is the major prison in North Carolina, they would give you a psychological test, an IQ test, after being in there several days. They shave your head, wouldn't let you wear afro. And I remember my third evening at Central Prison in Raleigh, the prison psychiatrist invited me to his office. I went. After giving my basics, my name and everything, he asked me some questions. I gave him honest answers to the questions. And then he said, the psychiatrist, Reverend Chavis, what did you dream about last night? I gave him a straight answer. I dreamed about escaping. If I'm with Jesus, and I was with Jesus, I'm not let confinement put a period on my life journey. That's why I had gone to Divinity School, Master's Divinity School at Howard University before the Wilmington case, a couple of years, actually 1 year. So I had heard about this great Divinity School at Duke. I'm at McCain Prison in McCain, North Carolina. Dean Lamford was the dean, and Terry Sanford was the president. So I'm writing to Dean Lamford, I'm writing to the president of Duke, and they're writing back. So I transfer my credits from Howard to Duke. They were accepted without the knowledge of the prison system. So I get accepted to the Master's of Divinity program in Duke University. Then I go to work to put pressure on the prison system to transfer me from McCain Prison down near Fayetteville to Hillsborough State Prison, which is the closest prison to Duke University campus, which they did. You know, I got along not only with the inmates, but I got along with the prison guards. So when the prison guard showed me my jacket, a jacket is you'll feel, it follows you wherever you go. So on my jacket, the prison authorities had written, Chavis should be incarcerated in a prison where Black men are not the majority. That was a hard prison to find in North Carolina. There was only one, and that was McCain State Prison. And so when I was on the back of this truck heading down to McCain, I said, wow, strange. They're sending me to a prison sanatorium. And there were 3 cell blocks in McCain. One for geriatrics, that's you had to be 90 years old. And they had a lot of people over 90 years old in the geriatric ward. They had a tuberculosis ward for contagious diseases. And then they had a behavior modification ward for those who they thought were mentally ill, and they were giving these inmates some kind of shock treatment. So I said, wow, now where am I going? They put me in the tuberculosis ward. But I found out something. Fear opens the door to evil. I had to be concerned not just with my own physical health, in that tuberculosis ward, I had to be concerned with all these other men. Many of them didn't have tuberculosis. They were sent there for punishment. And so I became a very vocal critic of what was going on, because see, here's the thing. If you believe in freedom, justice, and equality, you don't let your confinement make you silent. So they were moving me around to 5 different state prisons, trying to keep me from organized inmates, which didn't make sense, because the more they moved me around, the more organized. So, and I'm just sharing this with you because I know you all church leaders, you're budding theologians. I'm speaking to colleagues that I believe can help make a real difference in our nation at this time. We have to rise above the partisanship. We have to rise above the divisions. In my class at Duke, I kind of startled my students first day. I said, look, there's only one race. That's the human race. Prior to the transatlantic slave trade, there was no such thing as race. Race was a concoction to justify the dehumanization, to justify the propertization of human beings. And so they had to create this hierarchical structure called race. And it's the most devastating, untruthful thing. I have a friend who's a molecular biologist in DC. We talk about this all the time. Everyone in here, all of us, including me, 98% of our DNA is the same. There's only a 2% variant. So look, we are all part of one human family. And some of us may speak Spanish, some of us may speak English, some may speak Portuguese or whatever language. Some of us may be well-to-do, some of us may be in poverty. But we're all part of one human family. And I think what Karl Barth was trying, in almost a redundant way, to make the church deal with what is the purpose of the church. Church dogmatics became church teaching, teachings about the church. And that's why I'm honored to be in a pulpit that he used in prison. Thank you, it's an honor. Barth stated, Christians are called to stand where God stands, with the outcast, the forgotten, and the condemned, unquote. Communities of Christian faith are called to accept both the cost and the joy of discipleship. In 2025, how are we answering God's call to stand in the prisons of America? How are we answering the invitation of Jesus Christ to engage in discipleship? What does it mean for the theological discourse today if we understand God's most faithful and therefore most sacred dwelling place may not be an ornate large cathedral, but inside a small prison cell? Barth was a prolific theologian. In many volumes of church dogmatics, Barth declares, quote, freedom in the New Testament is the freedom of the prisoner. Great bold statement. He received a lot of criticism for making that statement. But I agree with him. It's interesting that depending on what theological school you go to, what divinity school you go to, there's either more of an emphasis on the Old Testament or emphasis on the New Testament. But we have to have both. You cannot understand the New Testament without the Old Testament. And I think that more comprehensive interdisciplinary studies, I believe in social science, but I also believe in applied science. In fact, when I study science, it doesn't weaken my faith, it strengthens my faith. Same thing with ecumenical and interfaith. I know some people say, well, you can't be hanging around with these Muslims and other people. I said, why not? It's not going to change my faith. The truth is, in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all three affirm that Abraham is the father of the faith. Well, what's going on with the children of Abraham? Why are we killing each other? Why are we justifying the dehumanization of others of the human family? And so we've come to this conference at a very important time, I believe. I'm already over time. But let me go to my conclusion. The notion of the incarcerated God renders hope for all who are imprisoned and to all who are downtrodden. The incarcerated God becomes the liberated God through Jesus Christ. I am certain that most of you are aware today that there are far-right authoritative focuses and authoritative forces who are attacking the academy, who are attacking the universities and colleges and universities. They're going to come after seminaries. Y'all just wait. Seminaries and divinity schools should not bow down to the interests of the powerful oligarchs of our nation. But the fact that we are here and openly having this national conference is important and timely. Evidenced by our theological schools will continue to be faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we will not be silent or complicit to those who divide, exploit, and oppress. As I move to my conclusion, there's one final recollection that I would like to share about the transcendent crucible of a prison cell. While at McCain State Prison, I received a letter from the religious writer at the Charlotte Observer. Her name was Mary Bishop. She sent me this list of questions. I sent her a 21-page letter back answering all of her questions. But there was one question that she asked me secondarily if I was sure that I had given her the correct answer. That question was, quote, Reverend Chavis, as you state that you are a political prisoner and a prisoner of conscience, what do you say was the greatest learning from your incarceration thus far? I immediately wrote back to Ms. Bishop, and without fear or contradiction, I stated, my greatest learning while unjustly imprisoned was coming to terms to realize and to affirm the oneness of humanity. That's why I'm in prison. So you know I'm going to do it now, and I'm out of prison. And some of you will say, well, how is that possible? Given all the negativity, people cussing, people mad, people angry, all the negative stuff that goes on in some prisons. Although there are a lot of goodwill in prison, but that never gets covered. Brothers and sisters look after one another in prison, but that never gets covered. And part of the narrative about prisons is to make, if you watch these TV programs about prison, I would say, oh my God, don't ever let them out. And so we got work to do to show that the narrative is about humanity. The narrative is about fairness. The narrative is about equality. So, my dear brothers and sisters, my imprisonment did not weaken my faith. By God's grace and love to Jesus Christ, I changed the penitentiary experience into a seminary journey. Karl Barth's theology encourages the church to confront the systemic racism of prisons. The oneness of humanity undergirds the affirmation of the oneness of God. Barth's argument was more than moral persuasion. For Barth, God's revelation in Jesus Christ shattered all human pretensions to moral neutrality in the face of social injustice, and in particular, the inhumanity of prisons. Barth's dialectical emphasis on grace and human sin exposes systems like mass incarceration as manifestations of humanity's rebellion against God, against God's justice, and against God's love. Finally, Karl Barth wrote in Church Dogmatics, where the church exists, it exists to serve the world in concrete obedience. Faith does not give us option to be inactive or silent in the face of humanity's divisions and sinful practice. Barth does not simply present a theological critique of the church. He presents a summons to the church to act in solidarity with the imprisoned. In the third edition of my book, Psalms from Prison, I made the following point in Psalm 7. Quote, "But our faith in thee, O Lord, causes even from behind the prison walls not to give up. We fight on for righteousness, the imprisonment of freedom fighters shall not stop the freedom movement of thy people." We thank God for Karl Barth. We thank God for this conference. And hopefully we will all be strengthened as we seek to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. Thank you. Any questions? Okay. I'm ready. You can answer questions. Questions? Observations?
An autobiography, sir.
No, I have not written an autobiography. I'd have to do it. I'm trying to make sure that the biographies of Dr. King, Rabbi Joshua, the their biographies will update. That's all I'm doing. The intersection of blacks and Jews in America. I think that if only Jews are condemning anti-Semitism, that's a problem. If only black people are condemning racism, that's a problem. And, you know, if Muslims are only ones that are challenging Islamophobia, that's a problem. So we have to find a way how to join forces and work together. But yes, I know that's something I need to write.
Interesting how you connected Barth's understanding of the oneness of humanity and the importance of solidarity with his understanding of all humanity being united to God in Jesus Christ.
Right.
Did you get that from a specific section of the church dogmatics, or do you a theme that runs throughout Barth's writing?
I think there's a thing, you know, Karl Barth, he get a headache reading Karl Barth. So, but a positive headache. So no, to me, that undergirds all church dogma, the different volumes. It wasn't just one volume or one quote. That theme is through all of the volumes of church dogmatics. Yes.
Thank you very much. Do you have any specific ideas in mind what the church could do? Can you give some to improve the prison system? And is there an alternative to prison?
Okay. Well, the first thing we can do is visit the prison. The court. Isolation is very debilitating. Feeling like nobody cares about you. You become a prison serial number. I know in, I don't think they do this now, but in the early stages in the 1970s, I had a general case and some numbers, not my name. So I think we need to not only visit these prisons, but we need to have programs, educational programs, raising consciousness programs. Truth of the matter is, there's some very brilliant people locked up. Now, some would say, okay, well, they're locked up because they use their brilliance for the wrong thing. But remember Barth now. For Karl Barth, no one is beyond redemption. No one. So alternatives to prison, I think that first, we should oppose the privatization of prisons, because the more profit motif sets the standard of correctional policies, inmates are going to pay for that and do additional hardship. So I think we should write about possible alternatives. And some people do. I know some of the people who engage in womanist theology, they've been writing some about alternatives to prisons. But I think that's a discussion we need to have. So, yes.
I was struck also by your comments about the oneness of humanity and then the question, what can the church do? I spent 9 years in prison and was released 2 years ago. And as a clergy person and a bishop in the church and then a felon in the church, I came to discover that much of the visitation to the prison from the church saw prisoners as the others. And it was oftentimes contributing to loneliness and isolation. And so when we talk about how does the church come to the prison, I think there has to be some work ahead of time that reminds us about the community of all God's people rather than
I agree. The incarcerated are human beings. You just can't talk about the oneness of humanity on Sunday morning or whoever's in the church congregation. It's the oneness of humanity when we go outside of your church to these institutions. I guarantee you, and you may know this since you're your time in prison, representatives of the church should have a reason why they're visiting, not just to go and proselytize. I think that inmates need to sense that the church cares about them. Inmates need a sense that as a result of the visitation, maybe I can get on a better pathway to improve my life. So keep in mind that visitation is just not physically going to the prison. Visitation is also follow-up letters, depending on the custody level of the prison. I was very pleased with my recent visit to the federal prison in North Carolina. Like I say, the prison guards clapped too. So, but I think that the final answer to your question, the intentionality of the visitation to prisons is not so much what we get from it, but what we give to it. We should be the ambassadors of God's love, sharing hope, sharing a sense that no matter what confinement level they may have, there's always place and room for improvement. And to me, faith transforms. If I say I got faith and I'm doing the same thing 10 years later, I got to question my faith. Faith should be transformative. And I think that finally, visiting prisons should help to instill and to undergird the faith of those who we are visiting. Yes.
You said you are the state property.
Well, that's what
North Carolina.
Yes.
North Carolina. And then that is like every language. It brings out a lot.
Yeah.
You're right. But then you said also you have no Pyrenees. And you are like dehumanized. So how do you process these kind of things and then have no Pyrenees?
I think that the identity question is very important. Even though I was referred to as property, I did not carry myself. I didn't fire back at the judge because, I didn't want to get in contempt of court. But I wrote to the judge after that. And I said, Your Honor, your characterization of me as property, I think it's inappropriate. The judge wrote me back and said, thank you for your observations. And what did he say? Thank you for your observations. But if you come back to my court, I'm going to put you in prison. I think the judge was a little angry that somebody he had just tried, well, first of all, dared to write him. But it was very calm. And one of the things I found in life, if you want to achieve an objective, you don't let yourself get sucked into a situation where you are fighting over a narrative that you don't control. So I think that when these things happen, you have to note it. I write about it. And I'm not so sure how much more time the judge used that term, but he did acknowledge. That's it. Yes, sir.
I think, how would I?
Well, for teens, I would say you have to use culture and arts. Believe it or not, I'm a hip hop head. I go into the studio with these artists. I'm trying to help them ground whatever they're doing with some kind of spiritual base. But another reason why I do it because that's how I communicate with the masses. There's an R-rated movie called Belly. When I go to all these communities around the country, people do not acknowledge me as, oh, that's the guy that did the Million Man March, that's the NAACP guy, that's the Woodland Chin guy. You know what they do? They say, that's the dude from Belly. Because the audio-visual image of society today, young people in particular, not only need to hear the truth, they need to see it. But see it in a way that's culturally sensitive. See it in a way that would encourage our young people today. I think that's the missing element dealing with young people today. They need more encouragement because there are a lot of things institutionalized and that discourages young people. So we have to overcome that. Yes.
Early on in your lecture, you made a statement that made me think about, I guess commonly whenever there's language around incarceration, we hear it said, someone serving time. You said make time serve.
Oh, may tap serve you.
I love that. And I just wondered for those who are imagining ways to put on practices that allow for prisoners to be encouraged, how are ways that we can, or what ways can prisoners make times serve?
Two responses. I really have to thank Duke Divinity School because they still paying me. I wanted to make sure that I was a good student. I had to learn to check the Old and Testament. Studying in a prison bathroom because in the prison lights out at 9:30. So there's only one light, and that's in the bathroom. So that's where I did most of my work. And Duke did not spare me. They didn't treat me like no special dude. I had to do the discipline of the student, and I appreciate that. Because to me, making time serve you is that you have an opportunity not to allow confinement to confine who you are, or not to allow confinement to lower your goals. I mean, I finished Duke magna cum laude, you know, and I had some very great professors that I'm always will be thankful for, because they helped me to see the theological enterprise, the ongoing nature of not just discussion, but the ongoing dialogical process. You know, something happens when people take the time to talk to one another. It deepens our faith. It doesn't weaken us. So, lastly, making time serve you. You know, books. I am concerned that, now I know it's history trying to erase, but you got young people who go to school now that don't have no books. Everything is electronic. I'm not, please understand. I just think that I guarantee you, if Church Dogmatics was all digital, nobody would read it. So I'm putting in a plug for books. I'm putting in a plug for writing. I'm putting in a plug for scholarly journals. I'm putting in a plug for that all of us find ways to express ourselves in a way that not only gives people hope, but share the pathway so that they can become better in life. That's what making time serve you is all about. Yeah.
We have a question from online. I put it up on the screen here
Okay.
from Dr. Angela Parker.
Okay.
She asks, I am thinking about the connections between alternatives to prison and reimagining atonement theories, specifically penal substitution.
Okay.
To reimagine prisons, we need to reimagine penal substitutionary atonement.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that connection?
Well, I understand there's a workshop. Yes. We have a whole session on that. It's tomorrow. Tomorrow. There it is. So, a long story. I'll give you just a show. Look, we all should see ourselves as contributors, not only to the narrative, the theological narrative, but each of us bring something to the academy table. Our life experience, where we're from, how we grew up. You know, I'm always trying to find what undergirds and unites us. I think too often we become scholars because we become so critical that the critique sometimes goes across the threshold of negativity. So to me, scholarly criticism is good, but toward what end? And I think that people are looking anew at Karl Barth, because one thing you can give him credit for, he stayed focused on his ecclesiological enterprise. in church dogmatics. And that's what we need today, you know. So I'm very thankful for this conference. I would like to, also, this is content. Now, what are we going to do, answer your question, about young people? We got a lot of content that's going to be given over the next several days. What are we going to do with this content? How are we going to distribute it? How are we going to impact people who are not online, but later? I think sometimes we underestimate the content, the value of the content we produce. Last point, going back to your question about young people. Believe it or not, young people today in America are hungry and thirsty for the truth. They really are. The question is, where do they go get it? Unfortunately, this is where they go get it. So we have our challenges. But I've come to Princeton tonight as an optimist. I hope you picked that up in my statements. All is not lost. Redemption always has a place. And the extent to which, even after this conference, we can find ways and means to accent the relevance of Karl Barth's writings, the relevance of Karl Barth's theology to today. I think across denominational lines, it'd be very helpful. Again, thank you all.